Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to be with you this morning, and if there are 200 people in this room, let me assure you that Bill and I are in the bottom 10 when it comes to being technologically literate. I know I'm in the bottom 10. I resist technology. However, I am a father way before I'm a school superintendent. And being the father of 3 digital natives, a 16-year-old, a 14-year-old, and an 8-year-old, my wife and I understand, I call them the children of light. Almost everything this generation that walks through our schools learns today comes through a digital image. Maybe it was a TV, maybe it was a video, maybe it was an iPod, maybe it was an Android, maybe it was a computer. And so for me to resist that in terms of powering them down when they walk through the school doors would be a little Pollyannish. So as much as I am not a big fan and a big user of technology, I understand that if our schools are going to be effective, we have to embrace it. Back to that role as a father. I don't know much, but I promise you this, that this statement is true. 20 years from now, God willing, those of us who are still walking this planet and have the opportunity to come face to face are going to say, can you believe what has happened to public education? The only question, and it's one of the reasons that you're here today, is we have to decide what the tone, what the intonation, what the context of that statement is. Because as the individuals who are supposed to be the advocates for public education, right now I would put my money on, and I'm not a betting man, that the intonation will be, can you believe what's happened to public education? I continue to stay in public education. I continue to take a beating for the least of these, my brethren, because I'm going to do everything I can. I'm going to work till my fingers bleed. So that 20 years from now when I bump into you, it can be more like, can you believe how we have transformed and what has happened to public education? But folks, we're at a tipping point. It's going to be one or the other. You know, my friend from Apple here said there's never been a greater time to be part of public education. I don't know, Bill. I've been doing this 25 years. I'm not sure I can agree with you there. How many folks would agree it's pretty tough to be in public education right now? How many people would agree that maybe we have a few critics in public education? How many people would say that with this bumper sticker mentality that we have, with every individual that calls themselves a policy leader having a simple solution for a complex situation, would believe that it's tougher and tougher to get people to see the complexity of what we do every day when we work with boys and girls? I've got a quick little video clip, and some of you are old enough to even know where this came from. It's pirated again. Came from the movie Airplane. Anybody remember the movie Airplane? Lloyd Bridges was working in the control tower. And Lloyd was supposed to be taking care of this disaster that was going on, and apparently he'd just overcome a number of vices. And so every time they panned to Lloyd, he'd say, I picked a bad week. And you'll see it on the video. But see if this doesn't feel like us sometimes. Can you show that video clip?
Looks like I picked the wrong week to quit smoking. Looks like I picked the wrong week to quit drinking. I can't take much more of this. Looks like I picked the wrong week to quit amphetamines. Looks like I picked the wrong week to quit sniffing glue.
Lloyd was convinced that he had picked the wrong week to quit those things. Let me challenge you today, my brothers and sisters that work for the boys and girls of North Carolina or Wisconsin or Connecticut or Rhode Island or Georgia or Alabama, that the stakes have never been higher and we have picked the right time to be part of public education. That was a spoof, but on a much more serious note, ancient scripture records a queen by the name of Esther. And Esther was a queen in the country of Persia at a time, and she was a Jew at the time when it wasn't cool to be a Jew in Persia. And some of the king's inner circle had made the determination, and see if this doesn't sound like talk radio. See if this doesn't sound like some of my friends in the Tea Party. But some of the individuals that surrounded the king of Persia had made the determination, we just need to annihilate these Jews. They're just no darn good. Translate that into today, we just need to get rid of these public schools. These darn government schools are no good. We need to let money follow kids. We need to just dismantle the whole thing and blow it up. And boy, wouldn't the world be better. Now remember, Queen Esther is a queen of the king of Persia, has all of the benefits of being inside the castle walls, and Queen Esther starts hearing the plans that the king's inner circle is saying, we need to get rid of these Jews. And Queen Esther does what a lot of us do in education. She starts to make the determination of, well, I could say something to the king, but gosh, I got it pretty good. And so Queen Esther does what a lot of us do, and she makes the determination, I think I'll just kind of lay low on this one. I'll let it just kind of go past me, and we'll see what happens. Fortunately for the Jewish nation, a gentleman by the name of Mordecai, one of her countrymen, comes to her and says, Esther, says, wake up. Said, do you truly think just because you live in the castle that if in fact the king's advisors get their way that you'll be passed over in the annihilation of the Jews? And here's the challenge that I give you today. Mordecai looks into Esther, he looks into her eyes, he looks right into the window of her soul, and he says, perhaps it was for a time such as this that you were created. Folks, I don't know about you, but I'm sick and tired of those of us that call ourselves educators being P&P teachers. And a P&P teacher is somebody who's working for a paycheck and waiting for a pension. And we say, yeah, the times are tough, but you know what? I'm just going to kind of let this thing fly on by, and maybe somebody else will take care of it. Public sentiment and people, remember the old Rush song, the men who hold high places must be the ones to start, to mold a new reality closer to the heart. If you are under any illusion that a lot of the people who are making policy decisions in this country don't want to dismantle and discontinue public education, I would suggest it's time to wake up. And here's the incredible thing. You remember old Sergeant Friday from Dragnet? Just the facts, ma'am? The facts are on our side. So I want to spend just about 10 minutes this morning showing you the facts that are on our side, and I want to encourage you to get off the sideline, and when people start talking about dismantling public education and all that's wrong with it, I'd like you to consider being the individual in your state, being the individual in your community who stands up and says, whoa, 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 wait a minute. I don't think the facts say that. As a matter of fact, there's been rather a minor miracle that's occurred in public education over the last 50 years. So let's look at some of those stats because I never hear them on talk radio. I never see them in the paper. And I don't know Governor Walker, but I never hear it being debated down at the General Assembly in Atlanta either. So, by the way, economic realities, everybody in here got a bag full of money and everything they need to do in terms of getting the job done? Yeah, we do too. But here's what we hear, and here's what I'm going to challenge you before we get into the idea of innovation and a mission possible, that I'd challenge you to question. This idea that, and I hear it so often I just have to chuckle, that public schools used to be good, whatever good means, and now they've gotten bad. I'm going to give you some data that might question that. The second is there's something bordering on immoral if we don't give students and families unlimited choices about where they go to school and how they spend the public funds that support education. And then what I'd like to close with today is a challenge that fits right into how you're going to spend the rest of your day, and that is what I believe, and you know, I get sick and tired of hearing about scalable ideas and scalable programs. There's not many scalable ideas and scalable programs. What is scalable is innovation at the local level. It's moms and dads, teachers and school leaders and students getting excited about their local education and building their dream school. And so we'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But first, this idea that schools used to be, let me change that. Public schools used to be good and they've gotten bad. First of all, let's look at, and this is just representative. I could have pulled a number of charts, but they all say kind of the same thing. First of all, NAEP scores, the only national measure we have that compares state to state. Have they gone in the tank over the last 30 years? Because last time I heard Neil Bortz talk, he certainly made it appear that they had. They really haven't. They've kind of stayed stable. At best, they've improved a little bit. And if I was working for Apple Computer in charge of sales, I might think that that graph doesn't look very good, but it's just a small piece of the puzzle. So stick with me. NAEP scores have not declined. How about the TIMS? You know, the International Math and Science Study that everybody talks about? how our kids can't do math, they can't do science, they're just plain dumb, and they used to be smart when we sent rockets to the moon. 1964, first year that we gave the TIMS. 11 countries in the world. The United States was 10th out of 11. 10th out of 11, what is that, 47 years ago? And here we are in 2007, we're actually in the upper quartile, upper 30%. Again, these wouldn't appear to be numbers that would say to me, all's going to heck in a handbag and American public schools have gotten awful when compared to our counterparts. ELL's been to Singapore lately, #1 math country on the planet. We had Banhar Heap, the Singapore math expert in our district, 2 days last week. They don't have ELLs. They don't know what ELLs are. Look at the percentage increase of children sitting in your desks, sitting in your classrooms, just in this sample of states, over a 10-year period in terms of the increase in the number of students that don't even speak English, but they're given the same exams. Not making excuses, just the facts, ma'am. Special education. I am very proud of the fact, and one of the reasons I can hang my hat on calling myself an educator, a teacher in the United States of America, is that we take all comers. But my goodness, how we have a short memory. Because it was only 1975 when PL 95-142 came into existence, and we began to think that it was important in this country to take all comers. Prior to 1975, students who we'd consider significantly disadvantaged in terms of special needs didn't come to public schools. I'm not sure what happened to them, but they weren't in our classrooms. So keep in mind this picture that I'm painting, and that is that the children in our classrooms have gotten tremendously challenging compared to 50 years ago. And yet, our results have stayed at least the same and probably improved a little bit. Doesn't sound like a failure to me. Diversity. It's a chapter of our country that we shouldn't be proud of, but back in the 1950s, over 90% of the students that went to our schools were Caucasian, and most of them came from two-parent families. We are steaming toward and almost at the point where half of the students in our schools, in our classrooms today in this country, are minorities. Good, bad, or indifferent, it's a different population in our classrooms than was 50 years ago. And I get sick and tired of hearing about how the Asian tigers and the Eastern Europeans are going to take our place in world leadership. Take a look at what the facts say. And by the way, this is the facts that public schools educated over 90% of the adults in this country. These sorry public schools. And here's been the results. We've won 270 Nobel Prizes, more than the next 5 countries combined. We've filed more international patents than the next 3 countries combined. We've had the largest economy in the world since 1900. And this last one I really like, and I point this one out to my children. We give aid to foreign nations, to the least of these our brethren, at a rate of twice that of the next closest country on the planet. Not bad for 300 million people that are products of our public schools. So the next time you're at a meeting and people are starting to talk about how bad our public schools have gotten and how good they used to be, I hope you'll challenge them with those assumptions. And not in a negative way, and not an adversarial way. I tell people all the time, you know what this country's forgotten how to do? We've forgotten how to disagree without being disagreeable. And that is unfortunate. We've got to find a way again to sit around a table and to have good men and women exchange ideas and be able to differ on their opinions and walk away without thinking it has to be a fist fight. And I don't know, maybe that's reality TV. Well, that's one of the assumptions I hope that you'll challenge if indeed we're going to make this mission possible. The second is this idea that it was funny, I was telling Aaron on the way down here today, I had the president of a bank actually come up after I gave my opinion last week at a public meeting on 1162, that he was angry. He said, my kids go to a private school, and how dare you talk about the fact that we ought to be supporting public schools first in these times of scarce resources, that we shouldn't be paying for kids to go to private schools. I know my phone's ringing, at least it's an Apple. Sorry. And it's amazing how angry people get over this issue. And I looked at him and I said, well, you know, if your line of reasoning is correct, I said, I live on a street called No Pone Road, potholes all over it. I said, I think what I ought to be able to do is call up the state government, Department of Transportation, call up the local highway crew and say, you know what, I don't mind driving on potholes. I'm not paying my taxes for keeping up the roads in the state of Georgia anymore. I'm just not interested. I said, do you really think I ought to have that right? And he said, maybe you should. And I said, well, we just don't have much to talk about then. At which point he said some ugly things. But there are a lot of people in this country that truly believe money ought to follow kids. They forget that it was about 150 years ago that we made the determination that public education ought to be accessed by all people. That it ought to be the one place that it doesn't matter how much money your daddy makes, doesn't matter who your grandpa is, you go and you get the same treatment as everybody else. And in spite of our warts and in spite of our flaws, I would make you this bet. That if we went over to West Georgia to the Kia plant, and we went in the break room, and we found a Jew and an Irish Catholic and a Muslim sharing a sandwich and a laugh at lunch, it would be because for 13 years of their life they had to go to a public school, they had to learn how to work it out, they had to learn to respect each other. And I shudder to think what will happen for my children and my grandchildren if we capitulate to this idea that people of means should be able to take their bat and go home. You can take your bat and go home, but you don't have an obligation to take my resources with you when you do that. So anyway, if in fact we are so immoral because we don't embrace money following children to go to private schools, it would seem that a logical place to start would be, and I don't hear this often enough, well, there's been a lot of choice programs around this country for the last 50 years. As a matter of fact, Vermont and Maine have had tuitioning programs since the 1860s for a very different reason. There's some remote areas of those schools where there are no schools. And so the state gives them a voucher and says, do the best you can, and they work very well. But that's not the kind of voucher I'm talking about here. So I continue to challenge people and say, shouldn't we be looking at choice programs around the country? Because, again, if I just read the paper and listen to the TV and turn on talk radio, I have to believe these kids are doing so much incredibly better than kids in our public schools that how dare we not give more kids those choices. So let's take a look at the big ones. The DC voucher program, 3 years, no statistical significant impact on math achievement overall for the offer or the use of a voucher. As a matter of fact, the kids that started furthest behind have even done worse in the private schools that they've gone to. You cannot find any evidence that says the DC voucher program has been a success, even for these severely disadvantaged children. How about Milwaukee? And I was actually born in Brookfield, so I know a little bit about the Milwaukee program. It's close to my heart. Been around for 25 years. One of the largest voucher programs in the country. The legislature, as a matter of fact, hired a group last year to do a study because they were going to show how much better these voucher kids had done than public school kids, and that would give them the springboard they needed to take it statewide in the state of Wisconsin. And a strange thing happened when the results came back in March, and it's right here. The public school kids outperformed the voucher kids, and it wasn't even close. And so the legislature wasn't quite sure what to do with that information. But as she said, as Einstein said, in a world where there is a simple solution for every complex situation, they did what reasonable people would do, didn't they? They expanded it anyway. Okay? The Cleveland program, Cleveland, Ohio, known as the Cleveland program. Been around since '95. Once again, if you look at the studies that have been done in the Cleveland program, no statistical significant difference in how students have achieved in either public or private schools. It has not been the raging success that we hear that choice is for our children. Here's one we should really pay attention to because we've got $50 million of these backdoor vouchers going to private schools in Georgia today. Again, the Florida legislature commissioned a group out of Northwestern University to do a study because they knew what they would show is that these kids who took advantage of the vouchers, the tax credits in Florida have done so much better. David Figlio, who's the Northwestern researcher in charge of this, has said in the last 2 months, he said, we don't have the final numbers in yet, but my gut is telling me there's going to be no difference. That these kids who've taken advantage of the 23,000 tax credits in the state of Florida aren't performing any better than their public school counterparts. So before I tell you a little bit about what we've hung our hat on in Hall County, I just want to make something clear, because some of you who aren't familiar with Gainesville, you're thinking Lake Lanier, big lake houses, a bunch of rich, affluent kids might be thinking, well, yeah, that's very different than where we are. Let me dispel some rumors. Hall County is not economically affluent. Much, I suspect, like people in your community, we have some affluence that happens to live around a beautiful lake, but boy, we've got a lot of diversity, we've got a lot of poverty. We've got 500 more students than we had 4 years ago. And all I'm doing here is giving you an update on your own system. The picture that I want to paint is we're all in the same boat. We're all trying to do more with less. We're all trying to do the mission possible with less resources. We have 500 more students than we did 4 years ago. We put together a general fund budget last year that was $25 million less than it was 4 years ago. Our kids aren't going to school 180 days anymore. I guess, it's interesting that policymakers that 5 years ago said, these darn American kids, we're not going to school long enough. We need to have 190 days, 200 days, 210 days. And then when the money runs out, we start thinking, well, maybe 170 is enough, or 172. We chuckle, but as a dad, I think it speaks loud and clear in terms of where our values are and in terms of what we believe is important in our culture. Our per pupil expenditures, because again, I don't want you to think we're sitting on a pile of money that none of you have, we're about $1,000 under the state average. So we're operating pretty lean. In that same time, we've created 8 new charter schools within our district. We've got 3 more that I hope to be approved in the next 30 days. As a matter of fact, the principal of one of them is sitting right over here. We've added 10 additional programs of choice in the past 5 years. 60% of our kids qualify for free and reduced lunch. And of our 26,000 kids, 6,000 of them qualify for English language learner services. We have a school in Hall County that I'll challenge anybody to match. 99% free and reduced. It's actually 99.3, 99.4. I think there are 2 kids that aren't. 95% English language learner, and they're doing just fine, thank you. So the challenge that I make for you this morning in this mission possible is that the time for innovation in your local schools is now. Because let me tell you what human dynamics, what psychology says when we start to feel defensive. And let's just be honest, we've been under attack for a couple of decades now. And what we tend to do is we don't let our creative juices flow when we're feeling defensive and when we're feeling under attack. We get into what we think of as the survival mode. And ladies and gentlemen, if we capitulate to a survival mode, we've lost this battle before it begins. It's one of the reasons in the last 7 years that even in spite of the public criticism, even in spite of the rhetoric in Atlanta and Washington, we have started innovating on steroids. What we want to do, and we challenge all of our schools, and you folks tell me if I'm wrong, is I say, I understand there's an awful lot of people think the CRCT is important, and the ACT and the SAT, and I can't even call all the acronyms, and they are. But there is a test that is much more important than any of those standardized tests that we give in our schools every day, and we call it the dinner table test. I don't know how many of you are parents and how many of you are grandparents, but too many days in my kids' school career, we've sat around the dinner table at the end of the day, which, by the way, is a dying art. And my wife or I have asked the question, what'd you do at school today? And the answer was, nothing. And unfortunately, that was the truth too many times. We have encouraged the individuals in our schools, our school leaders, our parents, our students, dream a dream school. Make sure it's not illegal, make sure it doesn't spend any more money, but decide where the God-given gifts and the God-given passions are within your community, and we'll support you any way we can building a school that passes the dinner table test. So we now have some little arts academies, and we have math, science, and technology and engineering academies, and we have some multiple intelligences academies, and we have some dual language immersion schools, and the value is not in the fact that it's some program that they've adopted. The value is in the fact that local people made the determination that, doggone it, this is our school. And we're going to dream something big. And we're going to do something a little different. You know, some of us in here have an athletic background. I used to coach football and wrestling. And here's the football analogy, and I forgive me if you're not a football aficionado, but it's, in terms of public education, it's 3rd and 27. And we're still running off tackle. We need to step back and we need to sling it. We need to try some things, not that are crazy, not that just have no research background, but some things that are different, to see if we can't get students excited about going to schools again, teachers excited about teaching again, and communities excited and bragging at the Kroger about what school their child goes to. That's the dinner table test. That's the mission possible. So here's some conditions that we've tried to make sure exist in some of our schools. Leadership. Out of our 33 schools, we changed 11 principals in my first 3 years. Whether you believe it or not, it rises or falls on leadership. If you don't have the right principal sitting in the principal's chair in your school, I can tell you right now, I'm not a very smart man, but not much is going to happen. We've made some principal changes. We have a handful of clear non-negotiable goals on our balanced scorecard of teaching and learning. We're not all going to go do our own thing and teach growing bamboo when kids indeed need to learn how to read and they need to be able to do mathematics well. We've got some very well articulated and very few set of non-negotiables. My Apple brother here will like this. We encourage uniqueness. You know, I tell children all the time, one of the greatest lies we've told you since you were this big, and you've all heard it, you've probably said it, some of you, I mean, maybe nobody in this room. But we say this, we say, great minds think alike. Oh, nothing could be further from the truth. Great minds dare to think differently, and we try to encourage that within our schools. Do more with less. I tell my principals, and again, you can get some testimonials over here, dream away. Come up with some new things and some new ways that you want to do business. But if you come up to see me and it costs more money, go on back to your school because I don't have any more money. There's no secret room with more money. And folks, as I look at the economic tea leaves, it's not going to get better anytime soon. 3 years ago, I said, we're going to look at the year 2011, 20 years from now, we're going to say that was the good old days. And unless something changes dramatically, I still believe we're going to look back on 2011 economically as the good old days. So if your vision and your plan to make mission possible involves a lot of new resources, I would suggest you're going to be disappointed. And the final one, and it certainly fits into what's going on here today, is appreciate technology's role. You know, we've said for so long, we've got to work smarter, we've got to work smarter, we can't work harder. I'm convinced, even though I'm not a big fan of technology, that technology is going to play a huge role in that. We have to be wise enough, and we're looking at it with our learning management platform in Hall County, to ask ourselves the question, what are those algorithmic, routine type activities that our teachers are doing every day that we can take advantage of technology and get them out of the business of teaching algorithms and doing things that kids can watch on a video or do online, and get them into the business of building relationships and giving boys and girls feedback. Technology will play a huge role. Technology in eBOARD makes my life easier. It gives us a way to categorize what we do at a district level. And so again, as much as I'm not your technology guy, and I tell my kids, and they can't believe it, when I retire, I'm not even going to have a cell phone. Sorry. That's a nice iPhone, but I don't even want one. I just want to be left alone. So when Connie Daniel brought me her plan and asked me to read it for what their charter was going to be at Mount Vernon Elementary School, here's the things that I asked myself, because over a period of 25 years, I found these to be common characteristics of innovation that sticks. Is there an expectation of excellence with whatever you decide your niche is? If you're not expecting more than we were expecting before, then there's no reason to change. Is it a niche program? Does it try to look at the fact that every child is an individual? You know, one of the reasons I love special education teachers and I love teachers of the gifted is they understand that education happens in the unit of the child, not in the unit of the class or in the unit of the school. What is the niche that you're creating for the students within your school building? Does it take advantage of creativity? Does it integrate curriculum and take it out of silos? Does it use technology? And being that I've got a friend here from Madison, you know, one of the giants of educational research that never gets talked about because you can't put it into an executive summary is Dr. Fred Newman at the University of Wisconsin. And Fred talks about this idea of authentic intellectual work. It's number 6 up there. And whether it's a kindergarten class or an AP physics class, we challenge our teachers to make sure that what's going on in your classroom a vast majority of the time is authentic intellectual work, and it has 3 components. The first component of authentic intellectual work is students are creating, they're not regurgitating. So when I walk into a classroom, whether it's 2nd grade or whether it's high school physics, I say, what are your kids creating today? And I ask kids, what are you creating today? What are you making? Number 1, kids ought to be creating, not regurgitating or memorizing. Why would we demean education to the level of a $99 device, they can Google it? Why would we spend their time having them memorize when they should be learning to think and to solve problems and to communicate? Second piece is kids ought to be involved in the idea of scientific inquiry pervasively. It's that Emersonian idea of I don't know, but we can figure this thing out. I mean, you ought to walk into a class, and you've been in them, and it doesn't take long to spot it. When you walk into a class, are there rows and are there little soldiers that are silent, or are there kids that are trying to figure something out, that are working together in teams? So, scientific inquiry. And the third piece kind of fits into the dinner table test, the third component of authentic intellectual work, and that is kids ought to see the relevance in what we're asking them to do without being told. They ought to know why they're doing something. And I think we have a lot of friends here from Missouri today, the show me state. The millennials are a show me generation. If the answer for why we're asking them to do something is because this will be on the test, folks, that's not good enough. And this generation is tuning out and turning off when we give them answers like that. And the other partnerships, it's really fun in our community. We have some great business partners, and they're always amazed because we go to them and we say, what can we do for you? And they say, what did you just say? I said, no, what can we do for you? I said, we got 26,000 kids, we got 3,400 employees, we got incredible infrastructure. I said, I know we can help you with your business somehow. And you don't want a check? I said, no, I don't want a check. It's not about money. It's about us creating a culture where you see us as a partner so that when we do need something, you'll jump right. And it's been amazing to watch. And we have some incredible partnerships where our kids are an incredible value add in the Hall County business community. A perfect example is the Lake Lanier Islands Resort, world-class resort on Lake Lanier. And the individuals who took over the resort 5 years ago happened to be personal friends, and so one of the first visits I made was to Mr. Williams, and I said, Mr. Williams, I said, we need to get some kids out to your resort. I said, what an opportunity for these kids to be learning. And being that he was an old friend, I think he was gentler with me than he would have been with most. He said, Will, let me just tell you, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, we don't do kids. And I said, Mike, I said, let me make you a deal. You let me send 25 kids out here for one semester with their teacher. I said, and if at the end of that semester you tell me these kids have taken away from whatever you're trying to create at Lake, I'll never ask again. We now have 4 classes out there. He said those kids are the greatest value add that he's ever experienced in the business world. He'll say, we'll take as many of those kind of kids and internships and teachers as you can send us. And it has been absolutely, positively incredible. It's that high expectation, that expectation of excellence, and kids will rise to that level. Please, when I show you these, don't think this is a, boy, look at us, look what we've done, because we make so many. I tell people all the time, do you expect perfection? No, I've made too many mistakes before 8 o'clock this morning. And we continue to make mistakes. And just because something has worked in Hall County, it may not work in North Carolina, and it may not work in Missouri. That's not my argument. I show you, and I quickly show you some of the ways that we've made the mission possible in Hall County just because I sure didn't come up with these things. Local communities, local parents, local teachers came up with these. We've got a dual language immersion elementary school, the world language, which is absolutely positively incredible. 10 years ago, everybody was whining about all the folks coming into our district that didn't speak English, they spoke Spanish. And so rather than sit around and whining, we started to say, where's the value add in this? You realize that we're the only industrialized planet left on the earth other than England that doesn't teach our children at least 2 languages, if not 3, 4, or 5? And we look at these West German kids that speak 7 languages and we say, gosh, they must have an IQ of 210. No, they don't. They live in a country that realized it was important to learn about other cultures and to learn other languages, and they started teaching when they're little, not juniors in high school, and you end up with children that speak multiple languages. So we now have little kids walking around our dual language immersion school that not only have picked up Spanish, they've picked up Mandarin Chinese. And I got my first complaint in the last 6 months, Aaron. I was at, it wasn't Kroger, I won't name the grocery store because Kroger's a great partner of ours. And it happens all the time. My wife and I will be at the theater, we'll be at the grocery store, and someone will start coming up to me, and you've seen them. They got something to say. And we're walking side by side, and my wife always does this number. She's gone. And this mom came up to me, she said, I got a complaint. I said, all right, bring it on. I said, what's the complaint? She said, my kids go to the World Language Academy. I said, oh, and I really did. I said, I don't know that I've had a parent complain about the World Language Academy. I said, this is wonderful. I said, what's the complaint? The only way we can grow is if we get some constructive criticism. She said, we've got a 1st grader and a 2nd grader, and they're already speaking Spanish fairly fluently, and they'll sit at the dinner table and they'll talk about my husband and I, and we have no idea what they're talking about. She said, we had to buy Rosetta Stone. It was $350. And I said, that's a good complaint. We have a Da Vinci Academy. It's a middle school where we took a group of teachers and a group of students, a parapro to answer the phone, and nothing else. We don't have lunches. We don't have custodians. We have teachers who are inspired and kids who want to learn, and we say, excuse my language, if you want to play grab butt, this isn't the school for you. This is a place where kids can come and where they can learn. We're doing it for 65 cents on the dollar of a traditional middle school, and I'll make you the argument it is one of the most high-powered middle school programs in the country because it's teachers, it's learners, it's a lot of technology, it's interdisciplinary, and it's not much else. It's not for everybody, but it fits that group of students amazingly well. Habitat High, our advanced construction kids, we pull them from our 7 high schools, and last week I had the opportunity to MC their fundraiser because they're now building their 9th house, soup to nuts, for Habitat for Humanity. They come at 7 o'clock in the morning, they spend 3.5 hours designing, framing, wiring, finishing houses, and the level of pride in these young men, and we now have 2 women, so I'm very proud of those young girls, is absolutely incredible. And guess what? Because they get the honor of getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning and coming to a project for 3.5 hours, they're not getting in trouble anymore. Their math grades have gone up, their English grades have gone up, and they're showing up for school. Amazing what happens when you start asking kids, what are you interested in? We got a multiple intelligences school. We've got, based on Joe Renzulli's work, 2 school-wide enrichment schools. We asked ourselves the question 7 years ago, what's the highest bar you can set for high school students to make them competitive with the Asian Tigers and with the rest of the world? And we decided it was the International Baccalaureate Diploma. And I think we're the only school of our size in the country that has 3 International Baccalaureate Diploma programs. Our Career Academy actually has a bistro that's open to the public. It has a trade and tourism department. It has a gift shop. And I'll make you the argument if you come to our Career Academy and walk down the hallway, although we have a number of students who are just pursuing a GED, others who are single moms and just want some work experience and not going to get a GED or a high school diploma, that there are also students there that are taking 3, 4, and 5 AP classes, and I'll make you a bet you can't tell me which is which. And I think that's pretty cool. Again, the middle school, the Academy of Inquiry, that's based on Renzulli's principles. We've got an International Scholars Academy at Johnson. We've got a wellness school. We've got a creative school of inquiry at Chestnut Mountain. So I hope what I have shared with you today is twofold. Number one, if indeed this mission that you're going to talk about today is possible, we got to get off the sideline, folks. I mean, we got to keep thinking, well, there's a champion down in Atlanta, or there's a champion in Madison, or there's a champion at the state capitol that's going to carry this ball for us. No, they're not. Do you realize there are 2.5 million of us public school people in this country? 2.5 million. And if we ever brought the facts out in front of people and challenged them about what I call the minor miracle that's been accomplished in this country over the last 50 years through our public schools, gosh, I think we'd quit fighting a lot of the battles that we're fighting at our state houses. So the first challenge I give you is you and encourage your colleagues to get the facts. And even though, as Queen Esther, if it costs you something, challenge those facts in a very civil and appropriate way when people bring them up. And the other is, Arnie Duncan's not going to send you a program that's going to change your schools. Rod Page and George Bush didn't send you a program with No Child Left Behind unless your district is very different than mine, that revolutionized your schools. If, in fact, you're going to have schools that pass the dinner table test, schools that moms and dads and aunts and uncles say, it'll be a cold day in heck for you to take the funding away from my child's elementary school. It'll be because local educators, local moms and dads, local children have created schools that they're proud of that pass the dinner table test. You know, there's a lot of folks in here that are educators that are feeling a little beat up, that are saying every time I open the paper, every time I talk to somebody, all I want to talk about is how bad public education has got. And I want to tell you, maybe it's the only thing I can do well anymore. But I'm honored to call myself your colleague. I think it's incredible what you do on a daily basis for the boys and girls in public education. And I would tell you 4 words that I tell everybody that works for me every opportunity I get. What you do matters. Don't forget that. May God bless you for what you do, and thank you for what you do.